us today. My name's Emily Berry from Utility Aid. I am the Partnership Manager, and I'm joined today by two of my lovely colleagues. Over to you, Rory, to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Ruaire Glackin. I'm the Head of Net Zero and Energy Management for Utility Aid. I've been in the role for 4 years, and our primary responsibility is to help our customers reduce their energy consumption and target net zero.
Thank you, Rory. And we've also got the lovely Lucy Knight on the call today. Lucy, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Hello, I'm Lucy and I am in the Customer Care and Communications department, and we help with all aspects of the customer journey throughout Utility Aid and send the lovely emails and social media posts that you see.
Thanks, Lucy. So the main topic of today's discussion is net zero, which is why we have you on today, Rory. Thanks so much for joining us. And we wanted to get a bit more of an idea from you of the feedback you've had from customers in the third sector in terms of what their struggles have been, areas of consideration and things to think about when it comes to starting that journey to net zero. So I just wanted to start off with, from your opinion and from your experience, do you think people's mindset has changed in terms of how they prioritise net zero now in comparison to like a couple of years ago?
Yeah, certainly there's been a big shift in the number of inquiries that we get, and more organisations, it's becoming part of their energy procurement packages that looking at methods to reduce consumption, obviously to reduce the bill because of the increase in costs that we experienced last year. Certainly been a massive driver. But also, you've got incentives there that are out there to help organisations cut carbon, and that's helping. And then we obviously have the climate emergency that's being promoted more and more as to the action that we should take in order to try and divert this or avert the impact of that. So certainly with any customer now coming to us that are looking at energy procurement, part of that is now focusing on what can we do to help with net zero and reducing consumption so that they can ultimately reduce their annual outgoings.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Rory. I would agree with that, actually. I think especially over the last couple of years where we've seen cost of living and the energy crisis, and then obviously before that we had the pandemic as well, didn't we? So I think we must have seen a big decrease in customers' usage across the board in most cases. Would that be fair to say from your experience, Lucy, as well, from a customer care perspective?
Yeah, definitely.
But in terms of, okay, so we know the reasons why we want to do the journey to net zero. We know it's better for the environment. We know we know what climate change is, and we can see that every day. And we know that there's positive effects to us doing it in terms of our expenditure on buildings. But in terms of starting the journey, Rory, I think it's quite a difficult one. If you haven't started it yet, it can be quite a daunting task on the face of it. So I was just wondering, in terms of that first step, so if somebody's coming to the point where they're saying, yeah, I want to start my journey to net zero, what's the best way for them to start it? What things should they do first in that journey?
So the first thing for me really is for any organisation should be looking at the data they're getting and the accuracy of that data. Obviously, if you start using estimated bills and that as your guideline for how you're going to reduce your consumption, you could be way out, 20, 30, 40, 50%, depending on, who your supplier is and the last accurate meter reading that you have. So the first thing you've really got to focus on is your data, good enough, and how you're measuring that data as well. So, things like, a lot of charities will look at their energy expenditure, let's say from, the years of the pandemic through to now, and see a huge difference. Well, you've got to consider the influences that are on your energy use. So the more people that are using the building, probably the more like people that are washing their hands, and that's going to impact your energy consumption. And there's many more examples of that as well, where that energy consumption is sort of tied directly to occupancy or demand or environmental conditions. So it could be warmer this year than it was last year. It could be colder, and how that impacts. So you really got to dig into the data first if you're going to make the journey as successful and as low cost as possible. data is the first part to make sure that you're getting right. Make sure you have good data, and that what you're analysing is accurate to what you're actually paying for.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of the data then, so if a customer wanted to get access to their usage data, because I know that Lucy has mentioned to me a couple of times with customer queries that have been coming through, that there's been a lot of queries and questions around smart metering. So in terms of smart metering, how does that tie into a customer having access to that data that you've mentioned?
So smart metering and AMR will allow customers that traditionally were on sort of non-half hourly meters, who were maybe receiving estimates, will allow them to get that hourly granularity of data coming in. So smart metering has got two roles here. One for the customer, and that you're going to get better information on when you're consuming. And the second benefit to smart metering is obviously on the grid side, because we have huge grid losses at this moment in time through renewables and the way we generate energy and how that's pushed about the country. So smart metering can help our grid carbon, if you like, reduce, so our carbon content of the grid energy reduce, and it can also help us then identify sort of might be waste, for example. So we could be looking and seeing, what's happening at 4:30 in the morning when there's nobody in the building. And we can analyze that to see if there's opportunities to reduce waste. So smart metering, really is key for for anybody that's serious about making an impact, controlling their energy use, and finding out what the true benefit of any, what we'll call an improvement measure, is something that will reduce your consumption. What the true benefit of that improvement measure would be, and secondly, then, once you implement that measure, half hourly data is going to be key to give you, has it worked? Is it working? How well is it working? Is there something going wrong in that, that project, that whatever the aim was is not being achieved? So smart metering goes hand in hand with the net zero ambition, and say from the customer wanting to reduce consumption to the grid wanting to reduce the carbon content of the energy that we're using.
So in terms of smart metering then, because we do get a lot of organizations and customers give us maybe not so positive experiences with having a smart meter fitted. Would you say that's fair, Lucy, for me to say, in terms of
Definitely.
Yeah.
So we do get a lot of that, but just to give people a bit of reassurance, that there are two different types of smart meters, aren't there? And the first generation are the one that most people have had a bad experience with. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the first generation of smart metering was called SMETS 1. There was issues in relation to the supplier and organisations being tied in then to that supplier, but SMETS 2, which is the latest version that you're getting, is not linked in any way to a supplier. So there's hope that that's going to be a much better solution. And so far, from my point of view, the information we get from SMETS 2 is really good for the purpose that we want it. Obviously, the customer experience is that there is some downtime, if you like, in installing smart meters. It can't be done without turning off your electric supply, and that causes problems and can cause issues then for organisations who maybe have to switch something off that hasn't been switched off for 20 years or whatever it may be. But certainly going forward, there is, they're advancing the technologies. We've now got SMETS 2 or AMR that can be fitted, and both of them have the same outcome. They're digitally providing you with energy consumption data. So I'm not quite sure about the customer care side, Lucy. Maybe you can enlighten us a wee bit more on that. But
I have a question actually. So you said about the data being different, the data that you're receiving. So what is the difference between the SMET 1 and the SMET 2 data that you receive, or is there not a massive amount?
There's not much difference in that, but we're talking about the difference in the data for smart metering is that you would have half hourly consolidation, whereas on an ordinary meter previous to a smart meter, with it's not being dialed, as either a customer reading or an organisation has went out and read the meter, or they're estimating that meter read, so that, and you're only getting it then once every 30 days.
Right.
So let's say you have a period where you leave the hot water immersion on, for 30 days. You don't see that until the bill comes in 30 days later, whereas now with SMETS and AMR, if you were tracking that data, we can see something's been left on there that shouldn't be, and you can sort of intervene a wee bit earlier. Just because you're getting that, as I say, half early, it's normally day +1, so it's the next day you get that data from the day before. So as opposed to being, if someone was on a quarterly meter, it might be 90 days before they realise something's left on.
Yeah.
Whereas now, if you're monitoring or if you're paying attention to your data, then you can pick that up so much quicker. Normally the next day, save all that unnecessary expense.
I think it's great that they're becoming more accurate, and we can rely on that data a lot more, because I think from both a domestic and a commercial sort of point of view, you can, we sit and watch it increase at home and think, oh dear, we'll turn that off and we'll turn this off. But I think it is really good, because I think in a normal day, you wouldn't necessarily think about every little thing that's on, but when you can see the money topping up, you soon start to be more conscious of the energy that you're using, definitely. And I think it would be really good for customers going forward to start implementing stuff like this, because I think a lot of people now are becoming so much more aware of net zero and watching their carbon emissions and watching their energy consumption, that it's making it a much more customer friendly way of being able to do it. You don't need all this jargon and it's difficult to understand instructions on how to do this and how to do that. You can literally see the pennies going up, and it's not hard to work out probably what's causing that. So I think it's a really good thing for going into the future, definitely.
So 3 or 4 years ago, when we first opened this department, if you like, a lot of the inquiries we were getting were people whose bill had all of a sudden went from £1,000 per month to 3,000, and everybody talked really in pounds as opposed to kilowatt hours. So much of the first sort of investigations that we're doing here at Utility Aid and this department, where people who's concerned that power went through the roof, and we would have had to go out and do a site visit to try and find out what it might be that's caused this blip. And in some cases it was, that the occupancy of the building had increased threefold. It was as simple as that. In other cases, there was something that had been left on and they hadn't realised, and the switch was in a loft. It's amazing the amount of times you cause that. And as smart metering come to the fore, we get less and less of that type of inquiry. So it's definitely beneficial to those who have engaged with it and implemented it. It is something that shouldn't just be fitted and forgot about. It, something that and it's become worth your while now to monitor your energy consumption, as from sitting at home watching your wee digital display. Now, I wouldn't go as far as that, because you'd be sitting all night worried what's going on, but certainly, that awareness has increased now, and the opportunity there to prevent that spend is becoming available to everybody. But if you've got a large portfolio of properties, that's maybe not going to be the answer, to sit and watch 30 monitors every night and see which one's going through the roof.
I think also as well, just like a last point on the smart metering side, is that surely, for any organisation, this is a game changer, even in terms of time, because especially for a lot of the customers we work with, a lot of people are volunteering their time or having to do a multitude of tasks all at the same time. So surely just having that one focal point, so you don't have to take meter readings physically anymore. Or even if you're going to do them just to spot check them, every 6 months, that's not the same as having to record your usage at the start and the end of every month. And as you said, Rory, if you're having to go round, 50 plus sites in some cases and do that, that's a time consuming task, isn't it? So
it's a full-time job. You could have somebody out all month, and then by the next time it's time to go around and read them again. So it's it's certainly, the benefits are there. People were setting up, had balances with energy companies before, where they were credited by sometimes thousands of pounds that would be better off in their own pocket, until which time they had to pay it. So the benefit of smart metering there is as well, the bills coming in, you can check your bill and make sure it's accurate in terms of the reading that's come off it, and be comfortable in the knowledge that you're not sitting banking money with an energy supplier, which is what traditionally has happened in the past, for both domestic and commercial customers. So
Thanks.
it's the benefits there.
Okay, so in terms of like first steps, we've discussed obviously the importance of having actual data and understanding your data, and then being able to look at, how does your usage look? I assume on a 12-month period, is there anything that looks out of the ordinary, maybe outside of business hours and things like that? So in terms of, there's a lot of people talking about scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 in terms of the net zero journey. Is there a way that you can explain to us in terms of how people should really look at this, and what order should they do it in? I think scope 1 is involving some of what you've already discussed, right, with the energy consumption. But I just wanted to get from your perspective, with people looking at this, what would be your advice?
So scope 1 emissions is basically where you burn a fuel on site. So for someone using mains gas, powering a boiler, that you receive the gas, it is ignited in your boiler that produces heat. Those emissions are coming out of a tailpipe out the side of your building. Much the same way as a diesel car. There's no emissions on the actual diesel, but when it goes through the engine and the engine ignites that, then we're getting emissions at the tailpipe. So your scope 1 emissions is where you're directly producing those emissions, as I say, on site. That could be coal or biomass or any of those kind of fuels where you're having to ignite them as such, and the gases that are coming off those. So we're recording those gases that you're emitting from site. Scope 2 emissions is where someone else is responsible for those emissions. So if we look at grid electricity as scope 2, because we're receiving it as clean electric, if you like, from the socket. But somewhere down the line, there is a gas power station that is burning gas to produce that electricity. So we are not directly responsible for that emission, but we're using energy that is a result of that emission, if you get what I'm saying. So it's an indirect emission. So scope 2 is recorded as basically grid electricity. Scope 3 emissions is really in your supply chain, and it's a very complicated subject that people are trying to simplify, and it'll take quite a bit of work for any organization to be able to report on scope 3, because you need so much information from coming from your suppliers. For scope 1 and 2 is relatively easy. We get invoice from your gas supplier, we get invoice from your electricity supplier, or your LPG delivery, or whatever it might be. We get those invoices, and that's fairly simple to calculate then, because they're giving it to us in kilowatt hours, and we can convert that. With scope 3, it'd be more like the guy who comes to clean your windows.
Oh, really? So that in depth? Like,
well,
you have to go that much in depth?
It could be that much in depth, but in the short term, scope 3 emissions that we're looking at should be like emissions that directly you could influence as such. So it might be that your organization buys a lot of paper, and instead of recording the amount of paper, you could attribute a carbon footprint to that, and you would see that your paper costs would come down the more you try and cut that carbon cost down as such. So, where there's a high expense in relation to an item, you might want to include that when you're reporting in carbon to your scope 3 emissions. But as I say, it's a complicated subject, and it's a complicated journey to be able to report on that.
Scope 3 include, I've heard some people getting quite frustrated when trying to track employee travel. Is that in scope 3 as well?
Yeah, so where an employee uses their own car, you would report it as a scope 3. Where you're the employees using a company car with company fuel, that would be a scope 1.
Okay.
So determining what that is. We're getting the train into work every day. That could be seen as a scope 3 emission. How far your employees are having to travel. All these things. At the moment, under SECR, There's no requirement to report in Scope 3 as yet. And for any organisation out there, the concentration at this point in time should be Scope 1 and Scope 2. But obviously, once everybody's reporting on their emissions, then Scope 3 will become slightly easier to divvy up into your sort of what your organisation's using. So, for a plumbing company, for example, that's coming out to us, and they're reporting on their emissions, then we might be able to factor in the percentage of business that you've done with that organisation and take their carbon footprint and attribute that into your like the likes of your Scope 3 emissions. So my advice to small to medium-sized organisations at this moment in time is forget about Scope 3 emissions.
Okay.
Focus on your 1 and 2.
Yeah, because that's where I suppose that's the information that will actually give you the immediate help as well, won't it, in terms of lowering your overall costs as well in some cases. So that's probably the best place to start from a financial perspective too.
Yeah, and I mean when we're reporting on our, when it gets to the net zero, if you like, in 2050, and you've done everything that you can in your building to, in your organisation to reduce your Scope 1 and 2 emissions, and you're starting to choose your supplier based on how they report their emissions or what information you can get from them, then we should be a lot closer to that sort of target, or if you know what I mean, we're a lot closer to an accurate figure when it comes to 2050, and all these things are going to be probably mandatory for organisations.
Okay, so as far as I can understand it, and everyone has to bear with me because this is not my area of expertise or Lucy's. So just to sum up, so if somebody was going to start their journey, the best thing that they need to do first is get a handle of their data, their usage data. Yeah. And then they'll be able to see if there's any anomalies or when their highest peaks are in terms of their usage and where their lowest points are. And then they can start to make reductions or change perhaps behaviours of people using the building to benefit them as an organisation, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that you would look into. I know BEIS are no longer in existence, and there's another government department now, but their estimate was that between 4 and 20% of an organisation's energy use is actually wasted. And we can back that up with some of the figures that we've established from auditing and surveying organisations. We have a program to sort of help organisations reduce wastage, and one of the organisations that we're working with at the moment has managed to cut their consumption by, I think, 14.7%, which is huge because it's a large organisation. But I mean, that's just really on behaviour change and encouraging people to get involved, because there's no point in one or two people trying to manage energy. It's got to be everybody's responsibility, and that's the way we've worked it with our energy champion services, that it's we're educating one person and we're encouraging them to promote to the building users and the anybody that's related to the building in any way to get involved and start this switching things off and making sure we're not wasting energy. So that could be a great starting place, because if you think about the energy consumption that you have, I know £1,000 per £1,000, it's 4% is £40 per £1,000 that you'd be saving. But over time, that's a long, it's 25 years at £40, and now we're into the £1,000 saved over that length of time. So it's really important that people try and get a grasp of that and understand how they can sort of get involved, and some of their actions can actually result in that that start of the saving. So if you can build that up first, then that's going to be quickest, because you're not having to invest a lot of money in that. Whereas when you get into equipment and things like that, the returns on investment can be over longer periods. So certainly addressing waste is going to be one of your first steps once you've got your data right.
And then looking at how you currently, so basically it's like how you're currently doing things and how you can make improvements to make it more cost effective and efficient.
Basically
Okay.
reduce your costs with your little finger.
And then in terms of, so we get a lot of people coming to us and asking us or telling us stories of when they've had equipment installed and it hasn't perhaps performed to the level that they wanted it to, or that they were expecting to. So in terms of 3 tips that you could give for people to carry out when they're looking at sustainability for their buildings, what would be your 3? Because I think that's what a lot of people would be interested to know, including me.
So the first thing is, going back to data. We're gonna keep going back to this, by the way. So sorry if I sound like a broken record, but quite often what I've found is that people are led by sales and marketing brochures, and there's something maybe worked for some other organization that they heard about, and therefore they just go ahead and adopt it into their own organization, without any consideration for the data, without any consideration for how it's actually going to operate, and how that might look on your consumption. So, if we've got accurate data for 12 months and you say you're going to install solar panels, we can look at that data and we can say, well, here's what the solar panel is going to generate, and here's what you're going to use at that time of the year. So here's the likely impact that that's going to have. So one is, you need to be you need to have good data to make sure you're not making these errors. The second thing probably is you need to try and understand the technology and how it's actually going to work in your organization. And the third thing probably is, you need to speak to somebody that's independent, that probably isn't involved in the sale of the goods, or doesn't benefit from the sale of the goods, so that you can get an honest opinion, and even if it's just to back up your own sort of suspicions or knowledge, then at least you've had that second opinion to say, right, this is probably what is going to save us. This is how it's going to work, and therefore you've got the right level of expectation, because the other side of the coin is that people have too high of expectations. I remember one time, a long time ago, phoning the school, and the lady told me they didn't need to have any energy contracts in place because they just installed solar panels. So her expectation was that the solar was going to, run the entire school, and they would have no energy bill, whereas in actual fact it's probably supplying about 4% of their energy needs. So, it's about managing expectations as well, and I suppose that's where having the knowledge, if you like, prior to install, you can set your expectations at a reasonable level.
And report those back to everybody, so everybody's got the same expectations as well, right, within the organization. I think that's the other thing as well.
Yeah, and sharing that information is right. Yeah. And just because something's worked really well for someone else, even if they're in the same sector as you, does not automatically mean that is going to translate into your organization in the exact same way. We all use energy different. Even 2 buildings that are exactly the same size, same age, so many similarities, and then you look at the energy bill and you go, well, that one's 4 times the price of this, and it could be down to how it's being managed. It could be down to the number of users. There's loads of different factors there to consider whenever you're looking at your energy use. So, and that's why we treat every individual building here as an individual building, bespoke. Our reports are bespoke depending on what their levels of consumption are. The advice is probably different for everybody, and there's very, very rare that we would get 2 buildings exactly the same with the same consumption on an annual basis. So I think everything's got to be treated that way, just like your houses. You don't use the energy the same way as your neighbour.
No.
They might be in the shower for 3 minutes, and you might say to them, well, I like 15 minutes in the shower. It's just that's what it comes down to, personal preference.
Yeah.
So That's where it's got to be bespoke, if you like, when you're looking at these things and not just taking that, oh, it said here, I'll save this a year. That might be true, or in most cases it isn't. It's going to work differently for you from somebody else.
I think that's a really great point, Rory, because I hear people saying, well, you know, this organization down the road did this, so we called the same people. And I think that's a really good point, that the fabric of your building is going to be totally different. The people using it is going to be different. You have to remember that. And the data, I'm going to take one thing away from today. It's going to be data. Always get the data. So I think what we've learned from today is that you really need data. And it's so important to have that data, because if you don't have it, you can't do any of the next steps, can you?
Yeah.
It's like the basics. It's like the first stage.
Yeah. So, I mean, good data allows you to make good long-term decisions. You know, there has to be some consideration as to how the building is going to be used in the future as well. You know, when you're looking at net zero, everything that you're going to sort of employ or deploy to reduce your consumption has a relatively long lifespan. You know, you're talking some things maybe 5 years, some things maybe 25 years. So you've got to look at the data that you have just now and how it'll impact the building in the short term. What are the long-term plans for the building, and what the impact might be on that? And the second thing then, you know, I mean, we talk about data, but once you have the data accurate, and you need to develop a plan, you need to be thinking about how measures interact with each other. So, you know, if you're going to insulate the external wall, and then 5 years later you're going to come and drill loads of hole in that wall to install something else, that's going to impact the performance of the insulation that you've applied. So everything's got to tie in with each other. You know, you improve you think you've got an inefficient boiler and your building needs insulated, so you think, oh, we'll do the boiler first and then we'll insulate. Well, actually, that's the wrong way to do things, because you want to insulate first and then put the boiler in, because when we insulate the building, the size of the boiler that you need to install is going to be smaller than the one you have at present, because you don't need as much heat out of it, because it's being kept within the building a wee bit better. So by insulating the building first, you can actually save yourself some money then on your investment on your heating system, because it doesn't need to be as big or have as much output. Some of the things like with solar panels, you know, people install solar panels and then the roof needs replaced 3 years later. The solar panels have to come back off. New roof goes on, solar panels go back on top of it. You know, you've just wiped out probably any return on investment that you possibly had for your organization. So, you know, first thing's data. Second thing is, what is the building plan? You know, where are we going to be in 25 years? How does the energy consumption maybe look like then, and what's going to be beneficial? What maintenance works need done on the building in that period of time anyway? Can we combine the new roof with solar installation? Because then we've only one set of scaffolding to put up for both jobs. That could be a couple of £1,000 or more saved, rather than doing it twice. So it's, you know, that I'm stepping on a wee bit from the data now, obviously, Emily, but that's where we're going, is data first, then a plan, then you know, how does it meet your budget? Because if we were all to target net zero today, you know, the cost is going to be out with most organizations' budgets. You know, even if we took a 10-year payback, you know, for organizations maybe with a £10,000 bill, and if we say we're going to do, you know, cut it by half, you know, down to 5,000, you're going to spend £50,000-60,000 in doing that, and you know, not everybody will have that budget. For some of the domestic properties, if you like, you know, the schemes they are going about where they will insulate your home, put solar panels on, and do all this. And I mean, it's basically a new house on top, cost of a new house on top of your existing house. So we've got to plan how, you know, in stages, what is the best thing to do to get to net zero 2050. And as I say, as much as we all want to do it today, the very fact is the major barrier is going to be cost.
And I think the fact that you're, as an organization, if you're engaging with it, I think your customers or your target audience or whoever it may be that use your facilities or products or whatever it may be, they will appreciate the fact that you're starting that journey or you're in progress with it. And I think people's understanding of it has changed. And I think people, especially customers, are a little bit more aware that it's not just fixed with solar panels. But I think what I've learned from today is that you have to do it holistically. It can't just be, it needs to be done almost like in a story order. Like you have to start, and then you have the beginning, and then you have the end, but the end is quite far away. And I think we've learned that, you know, it's not a quick journey, and it's one that it's going to take time to get there. And when you eventually get to scope 3, that's going to be, you know, a difficult task to achieve. But as long as you try and do the first 2 steps first, then you'll be well on your way. So I think this has been really super helpful, and hopefully people watching this find this super helpful. We will be doing more videos like this on certain subjects. So if you do have any subjects that you are looking to find answers from, or you would like to know more information on, then let us know, and we can drag more people unexpectedly onto these videos to get them to answer our burning questions. So if you do have any questions or want to know more about a certain subject, then just let us know in the comments. But thank you so much, Rory, and thank you so much, Lucy, for your time today.
You're welcome.
Thanks all.
Thank you.